There is a very specific kind of pain that doesn't come from rejection, betrayal, or even distance. It comes from losing someone who made you feel safe in a way you didn't even know you needed. And when that kind of person leaves your life, it doesn't just feel like you lost them, it feels like you lost yourself. Because when someone is emotionally safe, they don't just exist in your world, they shape how you experience it. Around them, you breathe differently. You think differently. You show up differently. You're not calculating your words. You're not second-guessing your worth. You're not bracing for impact. You're simply, and that version of you, that calm, open, unguarded self, it begins to feel like your truest identity. So when they're gone, it's not just their absence you feel. It's the sudden disappearance of that version of you, the grounded you, the understood you, the peaceful you. And that's what makes it so disorienting. You start asking questions that go far beyond them. Why do I feel so lost? Why can't I just move on? Why does everything feel heavier now? It's because they didn't just hold a place in your life. They held a place in your emotional structure. They became a reference point for safety. And without that reference point, your inner world feels unstable. But here's the truth most people miss. They didn't create that version of you. They revealed it, that peace you felt. It wasn't borrowed, it was awakened. That openness, it wasn't given, it was unlocked. That sense of being enough. It wasn't installed, it was recognized. They simply provided an environment where you felt safe enough to access parts of yourself that had always been there. So when they leave, it can feel like those parts disappear, but they don't. They go quiet, waiting for you to realize that you were never meant to depend on another person to feel like yourself. This is where your growth begins, not in replacing them, not in distracting yourself, but in reclaiming yourself. Because the most powerful shift you can make is this. Instead of saying, I lost the only person who made me feel like me, you begin to say, I experienced who I truly am, and now I must learn to become that person on my own. That's not easy. It requires courage. It requires sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. It requires learning how to soothe yourself, validate yourself, and stand by yourself in moments where you once leaned on them. But this is the path to emotional independence. And here's the deeper, almost divine principle in all of this. Sometimes people are brought into your life not to stay forever, but to introduce you to a version of yourself you were meant to become permanently. They are the bridge, not the destination. So the pain you feel right now, it's not just loss. It's transformation trying to happen. It's your soul saying, don't go back to who you were before them. Become who you were when you were with them. Because you don't need them to access that peace again. You don't need them to feel whole again. You don't need them to be yourself again. You don't need them to be yourself again. You just need to learn how to come home to yourself without needing someone else to lead the way. An emotionally safe person holds a unique and irreplaceable place in our lives because they function as a mirror to our soul. When we are around them, we see ourselves more clearly than we do alone. They reflect back the parts of us that we often hide, deny, or undervalue. It's not just about validation, it's about recognition. They acknowledge your fears without judgment, your dreams without ridicule, and your weaknesses without contempt. In their presence, you feel understood on a level that transcends ordinary conversation. You realize that your thoughts, emotions, and desires are not anomalies, not burdens, but integral aspects of who you are. This reflection allows you to engage with yourself more honestly and more fully than you could in isolation. And it fosters an environment where authenticity becomes a natural state rather than a courageous act. When someone is emotionally safe, the way they respond to you encourages self-acceptance. They listen without interrupting, without trying to fix, without imposing their own expectations. Their presence gives you permission to exist as you are, without pretense or performance. This is profound because most people spend their lives hiding parts of themselves to avoid rejection or criticism. The safe person becomes a sanctuary where the walls you have built around your identity begin to soften. You begin to explore thoughts and feelings that were previously locked away. You start acknowledging your needs, your boundaries, and even your contradictions, because you know that these complexities will be met with understanding rather than dismissal. Over time, this mirror effect deepens your sense of self-awareness. You start noticing patterns in your behavior, emotional triggers, and the subtleties of your own mind in a way that might have been impossible alone. In addition to self-awareness, this mirroring fosters growth. The emotionally safe person doesn't just reflect who you are, they show you who you could be. They help illuminate qualities within you that you may not recognize or value. When they express faith in your resilience, your creativity, or your capacity for love, it begins to resonate inside you. Their belief becomes a silent encouragement, gently coaxing out potential that had been dormant. This is transformative because it links your self-perception to genuine reflection rather than ego-driven self-assessment. The safe person teaches you, often unconsciously, that you are not defined by your mistakes or your past, but by the core of who you are, the part that remains intact no matter the circumstances. This can create a sense of inner stability, a feeling that even if the external world is chaotic, there is a version of yourself that is constant, grounded, and real. Another crucial aspect of this dynamic is trust. The mirror effect only works when trust is present. Trust allows you to be vulnerable without fear of manipulation, judgment, or abandonment. You can reveal your thoughts, emotions, and insecurities, knowing that they will be met with empathy rather than exploitation. This sense of trust is rare because most human interactions involve some level of performance, whether subtle or overt. In the presence of an emotionally safe person, performance drops away, and what remains is your unvarnished self. This is why losing such a person feels devastating. The mirror they provided vanishes, leaving you to navigate your own reflections without guidance, validation, or support. The depth of connection you experienced is not merely about companionship. It's about a rare alignment between your inner world and another person who sees it fully. Ultimately, the role of an emotionally safe person as a mirror extends far beyond emotional comfort. They provide clarity, self-recognition, and a framework for understanding your own life. They help you disentangle the layers of fear, doubt, and pretense that obscure your true self. The reflection gives you the courage to face yourself honestly and to grow into a more complete version of who you are. Losing them can feel like losing a part of yours. Lips, because in many ways they made visible aspects of your identity that were hidden even from you. But their greatest gift is not in staying forever. It's in showing you the possibility of seeing yourself clearly, feeling fully, and embracing your own authenticity. When you have someone in your life who provides emotional safety, their presence becomes synonymous with peace. It's a subtle kind of comfort, often unnoticed until it's gone. Being around them doesn't just make life easier, it changes how you experience reality itself. Their energy has a calming effect on your mind and spirit. You walk into their presence carrying the weight of doubts, insecurities, and fears, and somehow it feels lighter. Their understanding, patience, and empathy create a mental and emotional sanctuary, a place where your heart can relax and your thoughts can settle. You associate them with balance, stability, and a deep sense of belonging. Over time, this connection becomes more than just companionship. It becomes a foundational part of your emotional landscape, shaping how you navigate the world and even how you perceive yourself. When someone embodies emotional safety, your brain starts to associate them with feelings of serenity. Their reactions, their voice, their gaze, even their silence become cues that trigger a sense of calm and security. You don't need to constantly monitor yourself or prepare defenses because around them you feel protected. Your mind, which may otherwise be in a constant state of alertness or self-judgment, is allowed to rest. Your emotions, which might otherwise be overwhelming or confusing, find clarity and acceptance in their presence. This creates a powerful internal link. The more time you spend with them, the more your emotional equilibrium depends on their presence. Peace becomes a relational experience, something you access not only through meditation or self-reflection, but through the very act of being with someone who understands and accepts you unconditionally. And when that person leaves, the absence is profoundly disorienting. The peace you once took for granted no longer exists in the same way. You feel a hollowness, a subtle but persistent tension inside that you can't quite name. You may find yourself restless, irritable, or anxious, as though the calm that once came naturally now requires effort to access. This is because emotional safety is not just an abstract concept. It is embodied in the interactions, gestures, and presence of another person. When that presence is removed, the brain and heart experience a kind of withdrawal. You long for the stabilizing effect you once felt, but it cannot be replicated by substitutes. This absence creates a sense of internal chaos because the reference point that once grounded your emotional experience has vanished. It is important to recognize that this feeling is not about dependency in a negative sense. It's not about needing someone to survive or function. It's about the profound impact that genuine understanding and acceptance can have on your psyche. Humans are inherently relational beings, and we are wired to respond to safe, empathetic connections. When someone provides that consistently, it becomes an anchor. Losing them is not simply missing a person. It is losing the anchor that helped your emotions stay steady. The disorientation you feel is a signal, not a weakness. It is your mind and heart signaling that a key part of your emotional regulation, something external yet profoundly intertwined with your internal state, is no longer available. In essence, the peace associated with an emotionally safe person becomes part of your identity. You start to define your experiences through the lens of that safety. Their presence allows you to trust yourself to be vulnerable and to explore life without fear. Their absence, conversely, challenges that sense of trust, leaving you to confront emotions that were once softened and held by their understanding. The world feels sharper, the heart feels heavier, and your own inner voice can seem uncertain. This is why losing someone who provides emotional safety doesn't feel like losing just a companion. It feels like losing a part of the equilibrium within yourself, the calm center that you had come to rely on. And yet, this experience holds a deeper lesson. It illuminates how powerful emotional connections can be in shaping our inner lives and reminds us that true peace is not merely a gift from another person. It is also something we must learn to cultivate within ourselves. The absence forces us to face the reality that while someone can show us the path to serenity, the ultimate mastery of that peace must come from within. When we spend time with someone who provides emotional safety, we often begin to anchor parts of our identity in the way they make us feel. It is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but over time their presence becomes a measuring stick for our own sense of worth and security. We start noticing that when they affirm us, we feel confident. When they are attentive, we feel important. When they show understanding, we feel whole. Their approval and acceptance begin to shape not just our moods, but our sense of self. It is easy to mistake this emotional resonance for the essence of who we are, when in truth, it is a reflection of how deeply connected we have become to someone else's affirmation. This is the double-edged sword of emotional safety. While it nurtures growth and self-expression, it can also subtly blur the line between self-identity and relational dependency. At first, this reliance feels natural. After all, humans are wired for connection. We are soci, owl beings whose brains thrive on reciprocity, understanding, and validation. When someone consistently meets us with empathy and acceptance, it is comforting, grounding, and even transformative. We feel seen in ways that are rare and profound. The presence of this person allows us to explore our feelings without judgment, to voice our thoughts without hesitation, and to express vulnerability without fear. Gradually, we begin to internalize the experience of being understood, associating it with our self-concept. When I am with them, I feel confident and safe, we think. Over time, that feeling begins to define a portion of who we believe we are. The danger, however, is that this identification can become so intertwined with our sense of self that losing that person feels like losing the very foundation of who we are. Because the emotional state we experience with them, calm, secure, validated, was so profoundly aligned with our expression of self, their absence creates a vacuum. Suddenly, the internal stability that once felt automatic now requires deliberate effort. We may start questioning our own judgments, doubting our worth, or struggling to make decisions that once felt natural. This is not because we have changed, but because we have anchored so much of our identity to a relational experience rather than cultivating it independently. This anchoring is especially pronounced when the emotionally safe person fulfills unmet needs that we carry from earlier experiences, perhaps in childhood or past relationships, of unreligiousing, neglect, or misunderstanding. When we finally encounter someone who responds with consistent safety, we naturally gravitate toward them, sometimes unconsciously relying on them to provide the sense of stability and validation we lacked elsewhere. Our identity then begins to expand around their acceptance. The verse, "Ion of ourselves that is brave, open, and authentic," is no longer fully our own. It is co-created in the presence of someone who allows us to exist without fear. Losing them shakes this carefully nurtured version of ourselves because it was nurtured in relation to them. And yet, there is a deeper truth woven into this experience. The fact that we can feel ourselves most fully when another person validates us does not mean we are weak or incomplete. It simply reveals that human connection has the power to awaken potential within us. The challenge, then, is not to reject these connections, but to learn to internalize the security they provide. Over time, we must recognize that while another person can reflect the best version of ourselves back to us, that version already exists within. It is our task to anchor it independently, to trust that the confidence, calm, and authenticity we experienced in their presence can continue to exist even without them. The process is not immediate, and it is often painful. The emotional turbulence that follows, losing someone who has become a mirror for our self-identity, forces us to confront our own sense of sufficiency. We must navigate feelings of incompleteness, fear, and vulnerability, and gradually reclaim the parts of ourselves that we had placed outside our control. And in this reclamation lies empowerment. It is an opportunity to internalize the emotional security we once relied on externally, creating a self-anchored identity that is resilient, autonomous, and yet enriched by the relational experiences that once awakened it. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. While emotionally safe people can illuminate who we are, the task of truly being ourselves rests within. They provide the mirror, but the reflection is ours to hold. The journey from dependence to self-anchored identity is challenging, but it is also the path to lasting strength and authenticity. When someone provides emotional safety, they offer a space where the need to explain yourself constantly is lifted. Around most people, we are always on guard, careful with our words, measuring our actions, and anticipating judgment. There is a subtle tension that comes from being in an environment where misunderstanding, criticism, or rejection is possible. We hold back parts of ourselves, trim our thoughts, and sometimes even censor our emotions. But with an emotionally safe person, this need dissolves. They meet you with patience and understanding, giving you a rare permission, the permission to simply exist without justification. You don't have to rationalize why you feel the way you do, defend your choices, or explain the nuances of your personality. You can show up fully and authentically, and the response you receive is not criticism, but comprehension and acceptance. This liberation from constant explanation is transformative because it allows for a profound sense of emotional alignment. When you don't have to articulate every part of yourself to gain approval or understanding, your energy can shift inward. You begin to connect with your own inner landscape rather than focusing on how others perceive it. Your thoughts, feelings, and vulnerabilities are given space to breathe, and you can engage with them honestly. This creates a form of emotional intimacy that is rare even in the closest relationships. You begin to trust your own mind and emotions because you see them reflected and validated in someone else's understanding without the need for defense. The act of not having to explain yourself becomes a form of empowerment, a reinforcement of your self-worth that is rooted in the recognition that you are inherently enough just as you are. Over time, this dynamic fosters deep emotional reliance, though it is often subtle and unconscious. Science, because you no longer need to filter or justify your existence. You start associating your sense of stability and clarity with that person's presence. Their understanding becomes a kind of emotional scaffolding, supporting parts of you that might otherwise feel exposed or fragile. You experience relief simply by being around them. Your anxiety diminishes, your thoughts settle, and your heart feels unburdened. You are reminded of how rare it is to be in a space where vulnerability is met with empathy rather than dismissal. This repeated experience teaches your brain that emotional safety is not only possible but also restorative. It rewires your perception of relationships, setting a high standard for the way you expect to be treated. The danger, however, is that this emotional reliance can create a sense of incompleteness when the safe person is no longer present. Because your internal sense of security has become intertwined with their external validation, their absence can feel destabilizing. You may find yourself over-explaining to others, questioning your own thoughts, or struggling to trust your own perceptions and feelings. The clarity and calm that once seemed natural are now harder to access, leaving you disoriented. Losing someone who removed the burden of constant explanation is more than the loss of a companion. It is the loss of a stabilizing force that had allowed you to engage with life more fully and without fear. Yet, the underlying principle is not that you are dependent, but that this person has illuminated the possibility of a deeper connection with yourself. They have shown that your thoughts, emotions, and existence are worthy of acknowledgement without justification. The task after their departure is to internalize this acceptance, to give yourself the permission to exist without explanation, and to cultivate a sense of emotional security that is not contingent on anyone else. The experience becomes a profound teacher, revealing how liberating it is to live authentically, how vital it is to honor your own inner life, and how possible it is to meet yourself with the same patience, understanding, and grace that you once received from another. In essence, the emotional freedom offered by someone who allows you not to explain yourself is a rare and sacred gift. Losing them can feel like losing a part of your ability to navigate the world with clarity and ease, but it also presents the opportunity to reclaim that gift within yourself. You learn that while they may have opened the door to understanding, the capacity to live without constant justification was always within you, waiting to be nurtured and embraced independently. When an emotionally safe person is present in your life, they act as a stabilizing force, an anchor in the often chaotic sea of emotions. Their presence doesn't just offer comfort, it regulates your inner world. Around them, your mind finds clarity, your heart finds calm, and your spirit finds balance. They absorb some of the turbulence of your emotional landscape simply by existing in alignment with your feelings. They don't dismiss your fears or anxieties. Instead, they provide a gentle framework in which these emotions can be acknowledged, processed, and understood. This regulation is subtle, almost invisible at first, but over time it becomes essential. You begin to rely on the emotional consistency they provide, not as a crutch, but as a guidepost for how to feel, how to respond, and how to navigate life with integrity and composure. The disruption occurs when this person is no longer present. The loss is not merely a missing relationship. It is a disruption in your emotional regulation system. The patterns you had unconsciously relied upon, someone who could listen without judge me, who could respond with calmness and understanding, who could absorb the tension of your anxious mind, are gone. Suddenly the equilibrium that once felt natural is replaced by uncertainty. Your emotions, which were once anchored, may now feel turbulent and unmoored. You might experience mood swings, heightened anxiety, or a sense of disconnection from your own feelings. This is why losing someone who provides emotional safety can feel disorienting and destabilizing. You're not just grieving their presence, you're grieving the stability they brought to your inner world. This disruption also forces a confrontation with parts of yourself that were previously softened by their presence. When they were there, you could experience difficult emotions knowing that someone could hold them with you. Without that presence, you are left to face fear, doubt, and vulnerability alone. The protective buffer is gone, and suddenly your emotional life feels raw and unfiltered. Tasks that once felt simple, making decisions, regulating anger, expressing vulnerability, can become overwhelming because the external support system that provided a reference point for emotional balance is no longer available. The absence exposes how much of your emotional regulation had become intertwined with the safe person's presence. Yet this experience, as painful as it is, carries a profound lesson. Emotional regulation is a skill that can be cultivated internally, but it is often awakened through the relational experiences that mirror and support it. The emotionally safe person didn't just calm you. They demonstrated what stability looks like. They taught you, through presence and action, how to hold space for your own emotions and the emotions of others. When they leave, the challenge is to internalize that skill, to become your own anchor, and to cultivate a self-sustaining emotional resilience. The absence forces you to step into the role that they once played, not to replace them, but to reclaim the internal harmony that their presence once highlighted. The process of rebuilding emotional regulation after losing a safe person is neither quick nor easy. It requires introspection, patience, and self-compassion. You must learn to notice your emotions without immediately reacting, to sit with discomfort without seeking external reassurance, and to trust that your feelings are valid, even when no one else is present to affirm them. It is a slow but transformative journey, one that ultimately strengthens your inner self. By integrating the lessons of stability and understanding that you once received externally, you begin to create a sense of calm and balance that does not depend on another person. In the end, the absence of an emotionally safe person reveals the depth of their impact on your inner life. They were more than a companion. They were a living framework for how you felt safe, understood, and centered. Losing them disrupts your emotional regulation, leaving a void that is deeply felt. But this disruption is also a call to awaken your own capacity for self-soothing, self-understanding, and emotional resilience. The turbulence you experience is not a sign of weakness. It is a signal that you are transitioning from relying on external stability to cultivating an inner sanctuary, one that is permanent and anchored in your own conscious presence. When we connect deeply with an emotionally safe person, the bond often reaches into areas of our psyche that have long been wounded or neglected. Most people carry emotional scars, moments of rejection, neglect, misunderstanding, or hurt that have shaped the way they relate to themselves and the world. These wounds often leave us seeking a sense of validation, acceptance, and understanding that may have been absent in our earlier experiences. An emotionally safe person becomes more than a companion in such circumstances. They become a refuge, a space where these old hurts can be acknowledged, held, and gently healed. Their patience, empathy, and consistent support allow us to process experiences we may have suppressed for years, opening channels of emotional release that feel both liberating and profoundly intimate. The fulfillment of these unmet needs creates a bond that is deeply rooted in emotional survival. When someone consistently meets us with understanding, it can feel like finally finding the place we always longed for, a place where we can be vulnerable without fear, a place where we don't have to hide or perform. In this environment, the parts of us that once felt unsafe or unworthy begin to feel recognized and validated. This is why the loss of such a person can feel like more than just losing a relationship. It feels like losing a critical part of emotional nourishment. The safety they provide does not merely comfort us. It activates a profound sense of being seen, understood, and accepted that we may have sought for years. When that presence disappears, it can reopen old wounds, making us painfully aware of the vulnerability we had managed to temporarily soothe through connection. This process also highlights the interdependence of emotional health and relationships. While emotional safety is not a substitute for personal growth, it plays a catalytic role in helping us access parts of ourselves that are otherwise difficult to reach. Around a person who is truly safe, the fear of judgment dissipates, allowing long-suppressed feelings to surface. Grief, anger, shame, or longing that may have been buried due to past experiences can finally be expressed. In doing so, healing begins because the very act of being witnessed without condemnation validates our emotional experience. We start to internalize the message that our emotions are legitimate, that our past does not define our worth, and that we are capable of being understood and loved even with our imperfections. Losing such a person interrupts this healing process, making the resurfacing of old wounds feel raw and unmanageable. Additionally, the bond formed through the fulfillment of unmet emotional needs can create a heightened sense of attachment. Because our emotional architecture was shaped by early deficiencies in care or understanding, we may unconsciously attach more intensely to someone who provides what we lacked. The person who consistently nurtures, validates, and empathizes becomes a source of stability and reassurance that we have learned to rely upon. When they leave, the sense of loss is magnified, not just because of the person themselves, but because of the emotional safety and healing they represented. We are left not only missing them, but also confronting the fragile parts of ourselves that had depended on their presence for sustenance and recognition. Yet the experience carries an implicit lesson about self-sufficiency and resilience. While someone can provide the environment for healing and validation, the potential for emotional wholeness resides within each of us. The departure of a safe person does not erase the growth that occurred in their presence. It merely challenges us to internalize it. The skills of self-compassion, emotional regulation, and validation that were nurtured through connection can be practiced independently, though it may feel painful initially. The absence invites reflection, to recognize that the fulfillment of unmet needs is not something only another person can provide, but a capability that we can cultivate within ourselves, taking the lessons learned in the presence of safety and embedding them in our own lives. In this way, the loss of an emotionally safe person is both devastating and transformative. It reminds us of the depth of human vulnerability, the power of genuine connection, and the lasting impact of having our unmet emotional needs recognized. But it also invites the challenge to reclaim those parts of ourselves, to continue the healing that was begun, and to develop the internal resources necessary to feel secure and whole independently. The pain is a signal that growth is needed, that resilience is being called forth, and that the capacity for emotional fulfillment, once awakened externally, can ultimately be anchored within. When we lose an emotionally safe person, the pain often goes far beyond missing their presence. It feels like losing a part of ourselves. This is because such individuals don't just interact with us, they shape the way we experience life, emotions, and even our own identity. In their presence, we have the freedom to be fully ourselves without fear of judgment or rejection. We can express our thoughts, emotions, and vulnerabilities openly, and these are met with understanding and acceptance. Over time, this freedom becomes so intertwined with our sense of self that the way we feel when we are with them begins to define who we believe we are. They hold up a mirror to our authentic self, reflecting qualities and strengths that we may not have recognized before. Losing them can feel as if that reflection has vanished, leaving us uncertain, disoriented, and disconnected from the version of ourselves we had come to know and trust. The connection we experience with emotionally safe people often awakens a version of ourselves that feels whole, capable, and deeply understood. Around them, the walls we usually carry, the walls built from past hurts, insecurities, or fear of rejection, begin to crumble. We find ourselves thinking more clearly, acting more confidently, and responding to challenges with a sense of calm and clarity. The self that emerges in their presence is not borrowed, but revealed. They provide a container in which our authenticity can exist safely, and the self that flourishes within that container feels real, anchored, and true. When they leave, it can feel like that container has been removed, leaving us to navigate life without the structural support that once allowed our truest self to emerge. The disorientation that follows is a direct result of losing access to the part of ourselves that was nurtured and recognized in their presence. Additionally, the version of ourselves that develops in the presence of an emotionally safe person is often aligned with our higher potential. They not only provide comfort and understanding, but also model patience, empathy, and emotional maturity. By interacting with them, we learn to access these qualities within ourselves. Their guidance is subtle, yet profound. They don't force change, but their presence encourages reflection, growth, and self-awareness. Losing them, therefore, feels like losing not just companionship, but the very framework that helped us become a better, more whole version of ourselves. The grief that follows is compounded because it is both relational and existential. It is not only the absence of a person we valued, but also the temporary absence of the self that thrived through their support. The pain of this loss also exposes the emotional interdependence that had formed, often without conscious awareness. We begin to realize how much of our emotional stability and confidence had been shaped by the safe presence of another. Their absence illuminates the ways we had relied on them to hold, reflect, and validate our emotions. While this interdependence is natural and human, it makes the process of separation feel deeply destabilizing. We are forced to confront the reality that the calm, centered, and confident self we experienced was, in part, co-created with another. The journey forward requires us to internalize those qualities, to reclaim the version of ourselves that was awakened, and to learn to exist in that state without external scaffolding. Yet there is also a profound opportunity within this loss. The self we felt through the relationship does not disappear entirely. It was never fully dependent on the other person. It was revealed and nurtured through them. The task becomes reclaiming that identity independently, integrating the lessons and insights gained from the connection, and anchoring our emotional strength within ourselves. The process is challenging, often requiring introspection, patience, and self-compassion, but it is transformative. We are invited to recognize that the part of ourselves that felt understood, safe, and authentic can exist without needing someone else to hold that space for us. Ultimately, losing an emotionally safe person feels like losing yourself because they revealed, nurtured, and mirrored the best parts of who you are. The absence exposes your vulnerabilities and unsettles your sense of identity, but it also presents a profound opportunity for growth. It calls you to reclaim the self that was awakened in their presence, to cultivate emotional independence, and to internalize the security, confidence, and authenticity that you once experienced externally. The pain of loss is intense, but within it lies the transformative power to become whole, on your own, anchored in the truth of who you truly are. Thank you for allowing me to share these thoughts with you. Your openness to reflection means more than words can express. Wishing you strength and clarity on your journey. Goodbye, and may you always find peace within yourself.